Welcome to another human-read audiobook by the United Marxist Pact Discord server, link below in the description. In this series, we continue our investigation into the initial construction, the organizational structure, the principles and tactics of the form of worker organization capable of seizing political power and establishing the revolutionary proletarian dictatorship and communality, which can in turn produce economies of production through the shared class interests of the workers of the entire world. Our goal is to compile, analyze, and elaborate on what all these texts have to say about this. At the end, have a strong understanding of the exact scientific process of this, particularly in general terms. At the end of our readings as a whole, we will try to put it all together and present it as a coherent whole in an educational video with associated notations. Today's reading will be Trotsky's The New Course, written in 1923 as a critique of the developing bureaucracy within the Soviet Union. We have a pre-written textual analysis on the terms of the aforementioned topics, which is also posted in the pinned comment if you prefer to read it in text, or follow the link in the description to a read-only version of my Google Docs notes. This will summarize the contents of the text, but is no replacement for the actual reading itself, for the sake of understanding the context. In addition, in my reading, I supply my own commentary, critiques, additions, etc., which may be helpful for understanding some particularities. This is actually a key piece in the development of the left opposition, so let us get started. In this text, in terms of party construction, structural organization, principles, and tactics, bureaucratism is tackled along with suggestions for how to deal with it, along with the need for the party to maintain open lines of communication without censorship, while maintaining absolute flexibility in organization tactics, while also being able to retain the primacy of the proletariat. To begin with, the idea of some external deciding force making conclusions about the party is rejected, specifying the need for collective, self-analytical thinking as the only way to truly maintain continuity. Adherence to traditionalism is a rejection of such self-analysis, and thus passive discipline and only leaves way for ad hoc violation of those traditions whenever necessary to deal with things tradition is not equipped to deal with, while self-justifying it. With proper collective thinking, revolutionary initiative, critical, bold elaboration of questions, and iron discipline, the party can draw from continuity what is best and fit for new conditions therein, carrying forward the true traditions of communism. However, to have such a collective self-analytical thinking, bureaucracy of all kinds must be combated. These internal structures that think and decide for the party are unable to engage directly according to the personal needs of the working class and their immediate desires, and there emerges in such bureaucratism an insular sectarianism in the party, wherein members are attacked for not having what is determined to be the correct ideological stance, or for simply expressing objection or criticism. This in turn leads to cliquism from their factions, scheming, and anti-party groupings. A truly collective, self-analytical party allows its members to participate actively, though action is not taken solely for the sake of action. It is prepared at all times to engage in rigorous analysis to answer questions, and is always in the present to fit ideologically and practically with current conditions while anticipating future developments. Such a party bases its center of party activity within the rank and file membership and rejects any form of external control over such. In the Communist Party, all members must be equal in all that concerns the determination of tasks and fundamental working methods of the party, and the very special knowledges of each proletariat should be used there to give the fullest breadth of knowledge to make decisions. Only through proper democracy can the voice of all members be heard and the conditions for effective use of such collective knowledge emerge. The party bases its connection with the masses through nuclei, cells, and various social groups, all of which influence the party, which in turn needs to balance and synthesize them. Factory nuclei, the principal proletarian social group, rural cells, links with the countryside, military cells, links with the army and countryside, and finally, educational institution cells, links to all social groups. However, as multiple collective experiences are forced out, bureaucracy thereby has to take the fore. When the center is embedded in an external organ that is not connected to the workers, and such collective knowledge becomes less or inaccessible. The party starts needing to produce forms of auxiliary structures and functionaries to support their decision making and direct aspect of the party's and its activities. In such conditions, only technological improvements can reduce it without restructuring the party. Basically, because they're not getting access to that collective knowledge from all the different people going in and saying, hey, I know what to do in this situation because I've done it before. Instead, the various party members in positions of power have to create all sorts of internal bureaucratic structures, all sorts of titles, and so on and so forth to act as advisors and functionaries and carry out tasks and stuff, rather than the proletariat organically and actively going out and actually taking action when they see a problem. Continuing. Such apparatuses are necessarily bureaucratic machinery of information, and the instant this is produced, the functionary becomes separate from the party, and thereby the masses. Eventually, with enough quantitative development of bureaucracy, a qualitative shift occurs, the party itself separates from the masses. It is a social phenomena made up of systems of administration of men and things, and is caused by the heterogeneity of society and differences between the immediate and general interests of various groups of the population. Thus, to maintain itself, bureaucracy seeks to disunite and separate the membership into various social groups to more easily direct party activity, which weakens the party further. It must find managers, which are generally non proletarian, and place them into unquestionable positions in the party to maintain itself, using the apparatus to excuse actions which lead to the regime being consolidated, with decisions and tasks decided by few people, who also happen to determine reward and punishment. Ultimately, such bureaucratism is far more dangerous than splits and factions. In order to fully prevent factions, one would have to prevent groups, both permanent and temporary, which would require there be no differences of opinion. Such belief that simply the leadership prohibiting something will result in its ceasing is infantile. However, the source of differences of opinion is a contradiction between the need of having heterogeneity and unity is inescapable by purely formal means. And contradiction and difference is key in the ability of the party to develop ideologically and politically, and thus match its conditions. Thus, under no circumstances do you want to stop such. There are other ways to deal with splits which lead to the party growing, not receding. The task of leadership is to determine how to handle a split at a given time, which is not always the same every time. Experience will show how to deal with any given split. For example, in one potential split, the resolution was through the taking of action and showing the correct path through that action. 2. In another, the party engaged in rigorous education, discussion, and explanation to steadily cause the end of the developing split. 3. In another, through investigation, it was discovered that the reason for the grouping was because of deeper issues that the opposition itself did not even understand. These issues needed to be and were addressed, thus bringing an end to the split. The method of dealing with problems may cause divisions based on people's view on how to best deal with them, and these are not necessarily class-based divisions. Ultimately, our method of dealing with problems is a key part of Marxism, and that requires good preventative measures based on Marxian analysis. Simply tossing them away and pretending they do not exist harms the dynamism of the party. Every problem must be analyzed, not ignored through bureaucratic system. The party must hypothesize about any and all circumstances which may arise, detecting them in their infancy and recognizing and preparing for worst case scenarios, which makes it possible to make all necessary preventative measures based on Marxist analysis. Despite this, we should avoid excess of discussion or vulgar democratic tendencies. These are best avoided by organic growth and through the combating of conservative elements which tend to resort to bureaucracy to maintain themselves in their primacy. Conservative positions create tactics which are not based on analysis of conditions, but on traditions of the party, resting in, quote, natural daily transition. Such understandings stifle the party and lead to uncritical, conservative, and counter revolutionary organization which separate and tail the masses. In reality, under different conditions, different tactics are needed. When objective conditions are ripe, the workers need the party to present a revolutionary party, rather than one solely looking to increase numbers. And this party must have an orientation which has new tone, new ways of approaching the masses, new formation of the United Front, new methods of organization, and new technical preparation. In objective conditions, the party's orientation is ultimately a military formation aimed for direct action to seize power. But all military maneuvers and tactics are based on timing. If one misses a mark, it can be utterly devastating. Therefore, relying on what is understood as traditionally effective in one condition, but under new conditions cripples the party to take advantage of conditions. The party must be able to rapidly shift, while also recognizing the need for tradition to act as a mass organization, as the many people in it need to know what they are doing. As such, we need to fight against inertia, traditionalism, and routinism with the best weapons, farsightedness and revolutionary tactical initiative. This can only be done if one understands Marxism as a method, not predetermination, and Leninism as the application of said methodology under particular conditions. Some of Lin is generalized, but most of it is reacting to conditions out of far-sighted analysis of specific conditions, taking audacious tactical action. Every tactic should provoke struggle analysis, drawing from previous experience to determine usefulness of a situation while remaining free of conservative retrospection, precedent, pure formalism, and empty quotations. Action and activity as an aggressor is what is needed, as remaining on the defensive is a fetus and leads to the party falling in on itself. Rather, the party must grow outwards, not inwards, though while demagogy can give short successes, is inferior and always populistic, who has aimed to address, pose, and resolve fundamental revolutionary problems. Tactics are best developed through application through brave initiative, critical thinking, and ideological courage. Leaving it solely to past formal reference will halt its development. While action and initiative is key, the party should not engage in meaningless agitation, time wasting, fruitless justification of past errors, or, as stated, demagogy which undermines the future and weakens the party's self confidence. It should reject anything that stifles the will to revolutionary action, such as formalism, moralizing doctrinarism, and intellectual conservatism. Despite that, the party does not believe that, quote, anything goes. Rather, the mass party's morality is a bond of fighters in and for action. Such a bond rejects deceit of all kinds directed at comrades at arms, does not rely on rote formalism, canon, etc. It analyzes the methods of posing and solving questions, not on the answers given. And now I will begin the full audiobook reading. I hope you enjoy the session and will attend next time as well. Welcome to another reading session by the United Marxist Pact. Today we're going a little back in time. I was told that this is a key part of the left opposition basis, and it happens to be by Leon Trotsky. This is the 1923 The New Course. So in this text we've got, it's quite short, but it's got chapters on the question of party generations, the social composition of the party, groups and factional formations, bureaucratism and the revolution, tradition and revolutionary policy, the quote-unquote underestimation of the peasantry with an appendix of the fundamental questions of the food and agrarian policy, and finally the planned economy with appendixes in the new course, functionarism in the army and elsewhere, on the smisha between town and country, and two generations. So we're just going to hop right into it. I was particularly pointed at chapter 2, and we'll see. I don't know if we're going to be looking into the planned economy. That's kind of aside for our reading stuff. Okay. So chapter 1, the question of the party generation. In one of the resolutions adopted during the discussion in Moscow, the complaint is made that the question of party democracy has been complicated by discussions on the relationships between the generations, personal attacks, etc. This complaint attests to a certain mental confusion. Personal attacks and mutual relations between generations are two entirely different things. To pose now the question of party democracy without analyzing the membership of the party from the social point of view as well as from the point of view of age and political standing would be to dissolve it into a void. It is not by accident that the question of a party democracy rose up first of all as a question of relationships between the generations. It is the logical result of the whole evolution of our party. Its history may be divided schematically into four periods. A. Quarter of a century preparation up to October, the only one in history. B. October. C. The period following October. And D. The new course, that is, the period we are now entering. Despite its richness, its complexity, and the diversity of the stages through which it passed, the period prior to October, it is now realized was only a preparatory period. October made it possible to check out on the ideology and organization of the party and its membership. By October, we understand the acutest period for the struggle for power, which can be said to have started approximately with Lenin's April Theses and ended with the actual seizure of the state apparatus. It is through, even though it lasted only a few months, it is no less important in content than the whole period of preparation that is measured in years and decades. October not only gave us an unfailing verification, unique in its kind, of the party's great past, but it itself became a source of experience for the future. It was through October that the pre-October party was able for the first time to assess itself at its true worth. The conquest of power was followed by rapid, even abnormal, growth of the party. A powerful magnet, the party attracted not only workers with little consciousness, but even certain elements plainly alien to its spirit: functionaries, careerists, and political hanger-ons. In this chaotic period, it was able to preserve its Bolshevist nature only thanks to the internal dictatorship of the old guard, which had been tested in October. In the more or less important questions, the leadership of the older generation was then accepted almost unchallenged by the new members, not only by the proletarian ranks, but also by the alien elements. The climbers considered this docility the best way to establish their own situation in the party, but they miscalculated. By rigorous purging of its own ranks, the party rid themselves of it. Its membership diminished, but its consciousness was enhanced. It may even be said that this checkup on itself, this purge, was made post-October party feel itself for the first time a 500,000 head collectively, whose task was not simply to be led by the old guard, but to examine and decide for itself the essential questions of policy. In this sense, the purge and the critical period linked with it are the preparation, as it were, of the profound change now manifesting itself in the life of the party, and which will probably go down in history under the name of, quote, the new course. It did not. There is one thing that ought to be clearly understood from the start. The essence of the present disagreements and difficulties does not lie in the fact that the secretaries have overreached themselves on certain points and must be called back to order, but in the fact that the party as a whole is about to move on to a higher historical stage. The bulk of the communists are saying in effect to the leaders, quote, you, comrades, have the experience of the before October, which most of us are lacking. But under your leadership, we have acquired after October a great experience, which is constantly growing in significance. And we not only want to be led by you, but also to participate with you in the leadership of the class. Well, not only because it is our right as party members, but also because it is absolutely necessary to the working class as a whole. Without our modest experience which should not merely be taken note of in the leading spheres, but which must be introduced into the life of the party by ourselves, the leading party apparatus is growing bureaucratic, and we, rank and file communists, do not feel ourselves sufficiently well armed ideologically when confronting the non-party people. End quote. The present change is, as I have said, the result of the whole preceding evolution. Invisible at first glance, molecular processes in the lift and the consciousness of the party have long been at work preparing it. The market crisis gave a strong impetus to critical thought. The approach of the events in Germany set the party aquiver. Precisely at this moment, it appeared with particular sharpness that the party was living, as it were, on two stories. The upper story, where things are decided, and the lower story, where all you can do is learn of the decisions. Nevertheless, the critical revision of the internal regime of the party was postponed by the anxious expectation of what seemed to be the imminent showdown in Germany. When it turned out that this showdown was delayed by the force of things, the party put the question of the new course on the order of the day. As often happens in history, it is precisely during these last months that the old course revealed the most negative and most insufferable traits: apparatus cliquism, bureaucratic smugness, and complete disdain for the mood, the thoughts, and the needs of the party. Out of the bureaucratic inertia it rejected from the very beginning, and with an antagonistic violence, the initial attempts to put on the order of the day the question of the critical revision of the internal party regime. This does not mean, to be sure, that the apparatus is composed exclusively of bureaucratized elements, or even less, of confirmed and incorrigible bureaucrats. Not at all. The present critical period, whose meaning they will assimilate, will teach a good deal to the majority of the apparatus workers and will get them to abandon most of their errors. The ideological and organic regrouping that will come out of the present crisis will, in the long run, have a healthy consequence for the rank and file of the communists as well as for the apparatus. But in the latter, as it appears on the threshold of the present crisis, bureaucratism has reached an excessive, truly alarming development. And as it gives the present ideological regrouping so acute a character as to engender legitimate fears. It will suffice to point out that 2 or 3 months ago, the mere mention of the bureaucratism of the old apparatus, of the excessive authority of the committees and the secretaries, was greeted by the responsible representatives of the old course, in the central and local organizations, with a shrug of the shoulders or by indignant protestations. Appointment as a system, your imagination, formalism, bureaucratism, inventions, opposition solely for the pleasure of making opposition, etc. These comrades, in all sincerity, did not notice the bureaucratic danger they themselves represent. It is only under pressure from the ranks that they began, little by little, to recognize that there actually were manifestations of bureaucratism, but only somewhere at the organizational periphery, in certain regions and districts that were only a deviation in practice from the straight line, etc. According to them, bureaucratism was nothing but survival of the war period, that is, a phenomena in the process of disappearing, only not fast enough. Needless to say how false is this approach to things in this explanation. Bureaucratism is not a fortuitous feature of certain provincial organizations, but a general phenomenon. It does not travel from district to the central organization through the medium of regional organization, but much rather from the central organization to the district through the medium of regional organization. It is not all a, quote, survival of the war period. It is a result of the transference to the party of the methods and the administrative manners accumulated during these last years. However exaggerated were the forms it sometimes assumed, the bureaucratism of the war period was only child's play in comparison with present-day bureaucratism, which grew up in peacetime, while the apparatus, in spite of the ideological growth of the party, continued obstinately to think and decide for the party. Hence, the unanimous adopted resolution of the Central Committee on the structure of the party has, from the standpoint of principle, an immense importance which the party must be clearly aware of. It would indeed be unworthy to consider that the profound meaning of the decisions taken boils down to a mere demand for more mildness, more solicitousness towards the masses on the part of the secretaries and the committees, and to some technical modifications of the organization. The resolution of the Central Committee speaks of a new course, quote unquote. And not for nothing, the party is preparing to enter into a new phase of development. To be sure, it is not a question of breaking the organizational principles of Bolshevism, as some are trying to have us believe, but to apply them to the conditions of the new stage in the development of the party. is a question primarily instituting healthier relations between old cadres and the majority of the members who came to the party after October. Theoretical preparation, revolutionary tempering, political experiences. These represents the party's basic political capital whose principal possessors, in the first place, are the old cadres of the party. On the other hand, the party is essentially a democratic organization that is a collectivity which decides upon its road by the thought and the will of all its members. It is completely clear that in the complicated situation of period immediately following October, the party made its way all the better for the fact that it utilized to the full the experience accumulated by the older generation, whose representatives entrusted the most important positions in the organization. On the other hand, the result of this state of things has been that, in playing the role of party leader and being absorbed by the questions of administration, the old generation accustomed itself to think and to decide, as it still does, for the party. For the communist masses, it brings to the forefront purely bookish, pedagogical methods of participating in political life. Elementary political training courses, examinations of the knowledge of its members, party schools, etc. Thence, the bureaucratism of the apparatus, its cliquism, its exclusive internal life, in a word, all the traits that constitute the profoundly negative side of the old course. The fact that the party lives on in two separate stories bears within it numerous dangers, which I spoke of in my letter on the old and the young. By quote, young, I meant, of course, not simply the students, but the whole generation that came to the party after October, the factory cells in the first place. How did this increasingly marked uneasiness of the party manifest itself? In the majority of its members saying or feeling that, quote, whether the apparatus thinks and decides well or badly, it continues to think and decide too often without us and for us. When we happen to display lack of understanding or doubts, to express objective or criticism, we are called to order, discipline is invoked. Most often, we are accused of being obstructors or even wanting to establish factions. We are devoted to the party, to our very marrow, and ready to make any sacrifice to it, but we want to participate actively and consciously in working out its views and determining its course of action. End quote. The first manifestations of this state of mind unmistakably passed by unperceived by the leading apparatus, which took no account of it. That was one of the main causes of the anti-party groupings in the party. Their importance should certainly not be exaggerated, but neither should their meaning be minimized, for they ought to be a warning to us. Okay, so we're going to take this bit here, break that down. All right, so this party must not create internal structures that think and decide for the party. It should engage directly according to the personal needs of the working class and address their immediate desires. Members in the party should not be disciplined for simply not having ideological development or for expressing objection or criticism. This leads to cliquism and factions and scheming into anti-party groupings. Continuing. The chief danger of the old course and the result of general historical causes as well as of our own mistakes is that the apparatus manifests a growing tendency to counterpose a few thousand comrades who form the leading cadres, the rest of the mass whom they look upon only as an object of action. If this regime should persist, it would threaten to provoke in the long run the degeneration of the party at both of its poles, that is, among the party youth and along the leading cadre. As to the proletarian basis of the party, the factory cells, the students, etc., the character of the peril is clear. Not feeling that they are participating actively in the general work of the party and not getting a timely answer to their questions to the party, numerous communists start looking for a substitute for independent party work for groupings and factions of all sorts. And it is in this sense precisely that we speak of the symptomatic importance of groupings like the workers' group. Well, okay, yeah. We'll add that. So the party needs to let its members participate actively, though not solely for the sake of action, and needs to be prepared at all times to engage in rigorous analysis to answer questions. Okay, continuing. But no less grave is the danger of the other pole, of the regime that has lasted too long and become synonymous in the party with bureaucratism. It would be ridiculous and unworthy ostrich politics not to understand, or not to want to see, that the accusation of bureaucratism formulated in the resolutions of the Central Committee is directed precisely against the cadres of the party. It is not a question of isolated deviations in practice from the ideal line, but precisely of the general policy of the apparatus, of its bureaucratic tendency. Does bureaucratism bear within it a danger of degeneration, or doesn't it? He would be blind who denied. In its prolonged development, bureaucratization threatens to detach the leaders from the masses, to bring them to concentrate their attention solely upon questions of administration, of appointments and transfers, of narrowing their horizon, of weakening their revolutionary spirit, that is, of provoking a more or less opportunistic degeneration of the old guard, or at the very least, considerable part of it. Such processes develop slowly and almost imperceptibly, but reveal themselves abruptly. To see in this warning, based on objective Marxian foresight, an quote, outrage, quote, an assault, etc., really requires a skittish susceptibility to the arrogance of bureaucrats. Nah, that's not necessary. But in actuality, is the danger of such a degeneration really great? The fact that the party has understood or felt this danger has reacted to it energetically, which is what was the specific cause of the resolution of the Central Committee, bears witness to profound vitality by the very fact reveals the potent sources of antidote, which it has at its disposal against bureaucratic poison. There lies the principal guarantee of its preservation as a revolutionary party. But if the old course should seek to maintain itself at all costs by tightening the reins, by increasing artificial selection, by intimidation, in a word, by procedures indicating a distrust of the party, the actual danger of degeneration of a considerable part of the cadres would inevitably increase. The party cannot live solely upon past reserves. It suffices that the past has prepared the present, but the present must be ideologically and practically up to the level of the past in order to prepare for the future. The task of the present is to shift the center of party activity towards the masses of the party. But it may be said this shifting of the center of gravity cannot be accomplished at one time. By a leap, the party cannot, quote, put in the archives, end quote, the old generation and immediately start living a new life. It's scarcely worthwhile dwelling on such stupidly demagogical argument. To want to put the old generation in the archives would be madness. What isn't needed is that precisely this old generation should change its orientation and, by virtue of that, guarantee in the future the preponderance of its influence upon all the independent activity of the party. It must consider the, quote, new course, not as a maneuver, a diplomatic stroke, or a temporary concession, but as a new stage in the political development of the party. In this way, both the generation that leads the party and the party as a whole will reap the greatest benefit. And I just realized that these footnotes up above did not actually lead to the texts themselves. So let's read these out real quick. So the April thesis was delivered by Lenin upon returning to Petrograd on April 4th, 1917. It was an attack on the Bolshevik leadership, Kamenev, Zinoviev, and Stalin for their conciliatory standing towards the capitalist government. The theses reoriented the party for a working class seizure of power against any attempts at compromise with the government. And the workers' group was one of the several dissident factions inside the Bolshevik Party that was opposed to leadership. Move on to chapter 2. Real quick, we're going to take a look at this. Alright, so the party must be in the present, and doing so be ideologically and practically more developed with current conditions. The party must always be looking to the future. It should seek to shift the center of party activity towards the rank and file membership. Okay. Chapter 2: The Social Composition of the Party. The internal crisis of the party is obviously not confined to relationships of the generation. Historically, in a broader sense, its solution is determined by the social composition of the party and, above all, by the specific weight of the factory cells of the industrial proletarians that it includes. The first concern of the working class after the seizure of power was the creation of a state apparatus, including the army, the organs for the management of economy, etc. But the participation of workers in the state, cooperative, and other apparatuses implied a weakening of the factory cells, an excessive increase of functionaries in the party, proletarian in their origin or not. There's a contradiction of the situation. We can get out of it only by means of a substantial economic progress, a strong impulsion to industrial life, and a constant flow of manual workers into the party. Now, what speed will this fundamental process take place? Through what ebbs and flows will it pass? It is hard to predict that now. At the present stage of our economic development, everything must be done to draw into the party the greatest possible numbers of workers at the bench. But the membership of the party can be altered seriously, so that, for example, the factory cells make 2/3 of its ranks, only very slowly and only under conditions of noteworthy economic advances. In any case, we must still look forward to the very long period during which the most experienced and most active members of the party, including naturally those of proletarian origin, will be occupied at different posts of the state, the trade union, the cooperative, and the party apparatus. And this fact itself implies a danger, for it is one of the sources of bureaucratism. Okay, so honestly, I suppose that we should do a general study of bureaucratism if we're going to be taking stuff onto that. It's important for worker organization form and structure and principles and tactics. That's a key bit of it, trying to combat bureaucratism, but still. Anyway, I don't know. It just. Hmm. Okay. Yeah. We'll add this bit here. One of the sources of bureaucratism is the production of functionaries to direct various aspects of the social of the state and its activities. This can only decrease via technological growth under conditions wherein the workers lack knowledge necessary to act as managers. Non-proletarians find themselves in the Okay. Continuing. The education of youth necessarily occupies an exceptional place in the party and will continue to do so. By building up in our worker schools, universities, institutions of higher learning, the new contingent of intellectuals, which includes a high proportion of communists, are detaching the young proletarian elements from the factory, not only for the duration of their studies, but in general for their whole life. The working youth that has gone through the higher schools will in all probability be assigned all of them, to the industrial, the state, or the party apparatus. This is the second factor in the destruction of the internal equilibrium of the party to the detriment of its fundamental cells, the factory nuclei. The question of whether the communist is a proletarian intellectually or other origin obviously has its importance. In the period immediately following the revolution, the question of the profession followed before October even seemed decisive, because the assignment of the workers to this or that Soviet function seemed to be a temporary measure. At the present time, profound change has taken place in this respect. There's no doubt that the chairman of the regional committee or the divisional commissars, whatever their social origin, represent a definite social type, regardless of their individual origin. During these 6 years, fairly stable social groupings have been formed in the Soviet regime. So it is that at present, and for a relatively fairly long period to come, a considerable part of the party, represented by the best trained communists, is absorbed by the very different apparatus of civil, military, economic, etc. management and administration. Another part, equally important, is doing its studying. A third part is scattered through the countryside where it deals with agriculture. The fourth category alone, which now represents less than a sixth of the membership, is comprised of proletarians working at the bench. It is quite clear that the development of the party apparatus and the bureaucratization accompanying this development are engendered not by the factory cells linked together through the medium of the apparatus, but by all the other functions that the party exercises through the medium of the state apparatus of administration, of economic management, of military command, of education. In other words, the source of the bureaucratism resides in the growing concentration of the attention and the forces of the party upon the governmental institutions and apparatus, and the slowness of the development of industry. Those are the basic facts and tendencies we should be fully aware of the dangers of bureaucratic degeneration of the old cadres. It would be vulgar fetishism to consider that just because they followed the best revolutionary school in the world, they contain within themselves a sure guarantee against any and all dangers of ideological narrowing down and opportunistic degeneration. No. History is made by men, but men do not always make history consciously, not even their own. In the last analysis, the question will be resolved by two great factors of international importance: the course of the revolution in Europe and the rapidity of our economic development. But to reject fatalistically all responsibility for these objective factors would be a mistake of the same stripe as to seek guarantees solely in the subjective radicalism inherited from the past. In the same revolutionary situation and the same international conditions, the party will resist the tendencies of disorganization more or resist them less, to the extent that it is more or less conscious of the dangers, that combats these dangers with more or less vigor. It is plain that the heterogeneity of the party's social composition, far from weakening the negative sides of the old course, aggravates them in the extreme. There is not and cannot be any other means of triumphing over the corporatism, the caste spirit of the functionaries, to deny the realization of democracy. By maintaining quote-unquote calm, party bureaucracy disunites all and everything and deals blows equally, even if differently, to the factory cells, the industrial workers, the army people, and the student youth. Yeah, we'll just take this on its own. All right, so the solution to bureaucratism, foreign corporatism, and functionaries is through democracy. Membership should not let bureaucratism disunite them and separate them into various social groups and treat them all differently, but also attack them all. Continuing. The latter, as we have seen, reacts in a particularly vigorous way against bureaucratism. This is to say, student youth. Not for nothing did Lenin propose to draw largely upon the students in order to combat bureaucratism. By its social composition and its contacts, the student youth reflects all the social groups of our party as well as their state of mind. Its youthfulness and its sensitivity prompted to give an active form immediately to the state of mind. As a studying youth, it endeavors to explain and to generalize. This is not to say that its acts and moods reflect healthful tendencies. If this were the case, it would signify one of two things: either that all goes well in the party, or that the youth is no longer the mirror of the party. but neither is true. In principle, it is right to say that the factory cells, and not the institutions of learning, are our base. But by saying that youth is our barometer, we give its political manifestations not essential, but symptomatic value. A barometer does not create the weather, it is confined to recording it. In politics, the weather takes shape in the depth of the classes and in these spheres where they enter into contact with each other. The factory cells create direct and immediate contact between the party and the mass of the class of the industrial proletariat, which is essential to us. The rural cells create much feebler contact with the peasantry. It is mainly through the military cells, situated in special conditions, that we are linked with the peasants. As a student youth, recruited from all the sections and strata of Soviet society, it reflected in its checkered composition all our merits and demerits. It would be stupid not to accord the greatest attention to its moods. Besides, a considerable part of our new students are communists with what is for youth a fairly substantial revolutionary experience. The more pugnacious of the, quote, apparatus men are making a great mistake in turning up their noses at the youth. The youth are our means of checking ourselves, our substitutes. The future belongs to them. I'll take this and send this to Burke Tide. Continuing. But let's return to the question of the heterogeneity of the groups in the party that are separated from each other by their functions in the state. The bureaucratism of the party, we have said and now repeat, is not a survival of some preceding regime, a survival of the process of disappearing. On the contrary, is essential new phenomena, flowing from the new tasks, the new functions, the new difficulties, and the new mistakes of the party. The proletariat realizes its dictatorship through the Soviet state. The Communist Party is the leading party of the proletariat and consequently of its state. The whole question is to realize this leadership without merging into bureaucratic apparatus of the state, in order to not expose itself to a bureaucratic degeneration. The communists find themselves variously grouped in the party and the state apparatus. In the latter, they are hierarchically dependent on each other and stand in complex personal reciprocal relations to non-party mass. In the party, they are all equal in all that concerns the determination of the tasks and fundamental working methods of the party. The communists at the bench are part of factory committees, administrative enterprises, the trusts and the syndicates, are at the head of the Council of People's Economy, etc. In the direction that exercises over the economy, the party takes and should take into account the experience, the observations, the opinions of all its members placed at the various rungs of the ladder of economic administration. The essential, incomparable advantage of our party consists in it being able, at every moment, to look at industry with the eyes of the communist machinist, the communist specialist, the communist director, and the communist merchant. Collect the experiences of these mutually complementary workers, draw conclusions from them, and thus determine its line for directing the economy in general and each enterprise in particular. Okay, I'll take this. Alright, so the Communist Party is the leading party of the proletariat and therefore of its state. The party must not be the state, however. It must avoid absorbing the bureaucratic apparatus of it. Communists in the party must not be placed in all sorts of groups, and instead be equal in the concerns of the determination of tasks and the fundamental working methods of the party. The very special knowledges of each proletarian should be used and to give the fullest breadth of knowledge to make decisions. And that, of course, requires them to be able to participate in such. Continuing. It is clear that such leadership is realizable only on the basis of a vibrant and active democracy inside the party. When contrariwise, the methods of the apparatus prevail, the leadership of the party gives way to administration by its executive organs, committee, bureau, secretary, etc. As this regime becomes consolidated, all affairs are concentrated in the hands of a small group, sometimes only of a secretary who appoints, removes, gives instructions, inflicts penalties, etc. Okay. This. Alright, so only through proper democracy can the voice of all members be heard and the conditions for effective use of knowledge emerge. Bureaucratism instead uses the apparatus to excuse actions whereby regime is consolidated, decisions and tasks are decided by a few people who determine rewards and punishments. Back to the text. With such a degeneration of the leadership, the principal superiority of the party, its multiple collective experiences, retires to the background. Leadership takes on a purely organizational character and frequently degenerates into giving orders and meddling. The party apparatus goes more and more into the details of the tasks of the Soviet apparatus, lives the life of its day-to-day cares, lets itself be influenced increasingly by it, and fails to see the forest for the trees. Party organization as a collectivity is always richer in experience than no matter what organ of the state apparatus, and same cannot be said of the functionaries taken as individuals. Indeed, it would be naive to believe that as a result of his style, a secretary unites within himself all the knowledge and all the competence necessary to the leadership of his organization. In reality, he creates for himself an auxiliary apparatus of bureaucratic sections, a bureaucratic machinery of information, and with this apparatus, which brings him close to the Soviet apparatus, he tears himself loose from the life of the party. As a famous German expression puts it, quote, "You think you are moving others, but in reality it is you who is being moved." Okay. So the multiple collective experiences forced out, the bureaucracy must take the floor because leaders are unable to know everything necessary to take action. They need to build formal auxiliary structures to support their decision making. These apparatuses are necessarily bureaucratic machinery of information, and with this creation, the functionary becomes separate from the party and thereby the masses. Finally, the whole daily bureaucratic practice of the Soviet state thus infiltrates the party apparatus and introduces bureaucratism with it. The party, as a collectivity, does not feel its leadership because it does not realize it. Thence, the discontentment or the lack of understanding, even in those cases where leadership is correctly exercised. But this leadership cannot maintain itself on the right line unless it avoids crumbling up in paltry details, assumes a systematic, rational, and collective character. So it is that bureaucratism not only destroys the internal cohesion of the party, but weakens the necessary exertion of influence by the latter over the state apparatus. This is what completely escapes the notice and understanding of those who yell the loudest about the leading role of the party in its relationships to the Soviet state. This isn't actually needed for this reading, but I want to add these to the dictatorship of the proletariat. Okay. And next up, we have Chapter 3, Groups and Factional Formation. Chapter 3, Groups and Factional Formation. The question of groupings and factions in the party has become the pivot of the discussion. In view of its intrinsic importance and the extreme acuteness that is assumed, it demands to be treated with perfect clarity. It is posed in a completely erroneous manner. We are the only party in the country, and in the period of the dictatorship, it could not be otherwise. The different needs of the working class, of the peasantry, of the state apparatus, and of its membership act upon our party, through whose medium they seek to find a political expression. The difficulties and contradictions inherent in our epoch, the temporary discord in the interests of the different layers of the proletariat, or the proletariat as a whole and the peasantry, act upon the party through the medium of its worker and peasant selves, of the state apparatus, of the student youth. Even episodic differences in view and nuances of opinion may express the remote pressure, distinct social interests, and, in certain circumstances, be transformed into stable groupings. The latter may, in turn, sooner or later take the form of organized factions which, opposing themselves to the rest of the party, undergo by that very fact even greater external pressure. Such is the dialectics of inter-party groupings in an epoch when the Communist Party is obliged to monopolize the direction of political life. What follows from this? Factions are not wanted. There must not be any permanent groupings. Permanent groupings are not wanted. Temporary groupings must be avoided. Finally, in order that there be no temporary groupings, there must be no differences of opinion. For wherever there are two opinions, people inevitably group together. But how, on the other hand, avoid differences of opinion in a party of 500,000 men, which is leading the country in exceptionally complicated and painful conditions? This is the essential contradiction residing in the very situation of the party of the proletarian dictatorship, a contradiction that cannot be escaped by purely formal measures. The partisans of the, quote, old course who vote for the resolution of the Central Committee with the assurance that everything will remain as in the past reason something like this. Second, we're going to take this. Oh. Sorry, back to text. Just look, the lid of our apparatus has just scarcely been raised, and already tendencies towards groupings of all sorts are manifesting themselves in the party. The lid must be jammed back on and the pot closed hermetically. It is this short-sighted wisdom that pervades dozens of speeches and articles, quote, against factionalism. In their heart of hearts, the apparatus men believe that the resolution of the Central Committee is either a political mistake that they must try to render harmless, or else an apparatus stratagem that must be utilized. In my view, they are grossly mistaken. There's a tactic calculated to introduce disorganization in the party is one of the following by people who persist in the old orientation while feigning to accept respectfully the new. We're going to go through this real quick. So in order to prevent factions, we don't have to prevent groups, both permanent and temporary, which would require that there be no differences of opinion. This contradiction between the needs of having heterogeneity and unity is inescapable by purely formal means. Back to text. It is in contradictions and differences of opinion that the working out of the party's public opinion inevitably takes place. To localize this process only within the apparatus, which is then charged to furnish to the party the fruits of its labor in the form of slogans, orders, etc., is to sterilize the party ideologically and politically. To have the party as a whole participate in the workings out and adoption of the resolutions is to promote temporary ideological groupings that risk transformation to durable groupings, and even into factions. What to do? Is it possible that there's no way out? Is it possible that there's no intermediate line between the regime of calm and that of crumbling into factions? No, there is one. The whole task of the leadership consists, each time that there is a necessary and especially a turning point, in finding this line corresponding to a real situation of the moment. I'll take this, but I'm going to skip summarizing it for just a second. The resolution of the Central Committee says plainly that the bureaucratic regime is one of the sources of factions. That is a truth which now hardly needs to be demonstrated. The old course is far indeed from, quote, full-blown democracy, and yet no more from the deserted party from illegal factions in this present story discussion, which, it would be ridiculous to shut one's eyes to this, may lead to the formation of temporary or durable groupings. To avert it, the leading organs of the party must lend an ear to the voice of the broad party mass, not to consider every criticism as a manifestation of factional spirit, and thereby drive conscientious and disciplined communists to maintain systematic silence, or else constitute themselves as factions. But doesn't this way of putting the question come down to justification of Myatnikov and his partisans? So, Myatnikov was the leader of the workers' group, an oppositionist faction inside the Bolshevik Party. Its members were expelled from the party. He left Congress in 1922. Back to the text. We hear the voice of higher bureaucratic wisdom. Why? In the first place, the phrase that we have underlined is just only a textual extraction from the resolution of the Central Committee. Further, since when does an explanation equal justification? To say that an abscess is a result of defective blood circulation due to an insufficient flow of oxygen is not to justify the abscess and to consider a normal part of the human organism. The only conclusion is that the abscess must be lanced and disinfected, and above all, the window must be opened to let fresh air provide the oxygen needed by the blood. But the trouble is that the most militant wing of the, quote, old course is convinced that the resolution of the Central Committee is erroneous, especially in its passage on bureaucratism as a source of factionalism. It does not say so openly, it's only out of formal considerations, quite in keeping with its mentality, drenched with that formalism which is the essential attribute of bureaucratism. It is incontestable that factions are scourged in the present situation, that groupings, even if temporary, may be transformed into factions. But as experience shows, it is not all enough to declare that groupings and factions are an evil for their appearance to be prevented. What is needed to bring this about is a certain policy, a correct course adapted to a real situation. It suffices to study the history of our party, even if only for the period of the Revolution, that is, during the period when the constitution of factions became particularly dangerous, to see that the struggle against this danger cannot be confined to a formal condemnation and prohibition of groupings. It was in the fall of 1917 the most formidable disagreement broke out in the party on the occasion of the capital question of the seizure of power. With the furious pace of events, the acuteness of the struggle immediately gave an extreme factional character to the disagreement. Perhaps without wanting to, the opponents of the violent uprisings made, in fact, a block with non-party elements, published their declarations in outside organs, etc. At that moment, the unity of the party hung by a hair. How was the split to be averted? Only by the rapid development of events and their favorable outcome. The split would have taken place inevitably if the events had dragged along for several months, all the more so if the insurrection had ended in defeat. Under the firm leadership of the majority of the committee, the party, in an impetuous offensive, moved over the head of the opposition. The power was conquered, and the opposition, not very great numerically but qualitatively very strong, adopted the platform of October. The faction and the danger of a split were overcome at the time not by formal decisions based on party statutes, but by revolutionary action. So we're going to take this. And I'm going to finish this paragraph before continuing. The second great disagreement arose on the occasion of the Brest-Litovsk peace. The partisans of revolutionary war then constituted a genuine faction with its own central organ, etc. How much truth there is in the recent anecdote about Bukharin being almost prepared at one time to arrest the government of Lenin, I am unable to say. Generally speaking, this looks a little bit like a bad main raid. That is a 19th century American novelist story, or communist Pinkerton. And yeah, the Pinkerton Detective Agency was set up in the 19th century as a private police corps designed to infiltrate radical and labor organizations with the express purpose of destroying these organizations. It may be presumed that the history of the party will take note of this. However that may be, the existence of a left communist faction represented an extreme danger to the unity of the party. To have brought about a split at the time would have not been difficult and would have not have demanded of the leadership any great intellectual effort. It would suffice to issue an interdict against the left communist faction. Nevertheless, the party adopted more complex methods. It preferred to discuss, to explain, to prove by experience, and to resign itself temporarily to the abnormal and anomalous phenomena represented by the existence of an organized faction in its midst. So basically, it's like, okay, what do you do about a split? Do you get rid of it, or do you want to get rid of it no matter what? But how do you get rid of it? Continuing. The question of military organization likewise produced the constitution of a fairly strong and obdurate grouping, opposed to the creation of a regular army and all that flowed from it. its centralized military apparatus, specialists, etc. At times, the struggle assumed extreme sharpness, but as in October, the question was excelled by experience, by the war itself. Certain blunders and exaggerations of the official military policy were attenuated, not without the pressure of the opposition, and that only without damage but with profit to centralized organization of the regular army. As the opposition had fell apart little by little, a great number of its most active representatives participated in the organization of the army, in which, in many cases, they occupied important posts. Okay, so we're going to go back and work through these. So, contradiction and difference of opinion is key in the ability of the party to develop ideologically and politically. The task of the leadership is therefore to determine how to handle the split at a given time, which is not always the same every time. Experience will show how to deal with any given split. In one potential split, the resolution was through the taking of action and showing the correct path through that action. In another potential split, the party engaged in rigorous education, discussion, and explanation to suddenly cause the end of the developing split. Back to the text. Clearly defined groupings are constituted at the time of immemorable discussion of the trade unions. Now that we have the possibility of embracing this entire period at a glance and of illuminating it in the light of subsequent experience, we can record that the discussion in no way revolved around the trade unions, nor even workers' democracy. What was expressed in these disputes was a profound uneasiness in the party, caused by the excessive prolonging of the economic regime of war communism. The entire economic organism of the country was in a vice. The discussion of the role of the trade unions and the workers' democracy covered up the search for a new economic road. The way out was found in the elimination of the requisitioning of food products and of the grain monopoly, the gradual liberation of state industry from the tyranny of the central economic management. These historical decisions were taken unanimously and completely overshadowed the trade union discussion, all the more so because of the fact that followed the establishment of the NEP, the very role of the trade unions themselves appeared in completely different light, and several months later, the resolution on the trade unions had to be modified radically. So I could write down another example was determination through investigation that the split was being caused by something entirely separate than what people were saying because they weren't really cognizant of why it is that there's problems and there's a more deep reason for the issues, and then that could be addressed. Okay, I will put that down. So yeah, so just recorded what it is that I said earlier. Continuing. The longest lasting grouping, and from certain angles the most dangerous one, was the workers' opposition. Footnote, it was the largest and best known of the oppositional factions inside the Bolshevik Party. Leading Bolshevik feminist Alexander Kollontai was its best known leader. The workers' opposition had a syndicalist program that advocated that all economic control be turned over to the trade unions. Back to the text. It reflected, although distortedly, the contradictions of war communism, certain mistakes of the party, as well as the essential objective difficulties of socialist organization. But this time, too, we did not confine ourselves merely to formal prohibition. On the questions of democracy, formal decisions were made, and on the purging of the party, effective and extremely important measures were taken, satisfying what was just and healthy, the criticism and the demands of the workers' opposition. And the main thing is that, due to the decisions and the economic measures adopted by the party, the result of which was to bring about the disappearance of the difference of opinions and groupings, the 10th Congress was able to prohibit formally the constitution of factions, with reason to believe that its decisions would not remain a dead letter. But its experience and good political sense shows. It goes without saying that by itself, this prohibition contained no absolute or even serious guarantee about the appearance of new ideological and organic groupings. The essential guarantee, in this case, is a correct leadership paying opportune attention to the needs of the moment, which are reflected in the party, flexibility of the apparatus, which ought not paralyze but rather organize the initiative of the party, uh, which ought not fear nor intimidate the party with the bugbear of factions. Bugbear. It's been a while since I've heard that. Um, Intimidation is most often a product of fright. A decision of the 10th Congress prohibiting factions can only have an auxiliary character. By itself, it does not offer the key to solution of any and all internal difficulties. It would be a gross, quote, organizational fetishism to believe that whatever the development of the party, the mistakes of the leadership, the conservatism of the apparatus, the external influences, etc., the decision is enough to preserve us from groupings, from upheavals inherent in the formation of factions. Such an approach is itself profoundly bureaucratic. Okay? Add this. Yeah, so to believe that by leadership prohibiting something will result in its ceasing is very silly. Uh, it might do that, but only if the conditions for that are in place. Continuing, a striking example of this is provided us by the history of the Petrograd Organization. Shortly after the 10th Congress, which forbade the constitution of groupings and factions, a very lively organization struggle broke out in Petrograd, leading to the formation of two clearly antagonistic groupings. The simplest thing to do at first blush would have been to declare one of the groups, at least one, to be pernicious, criminal, factional, etc. But the Central Committee refused categorically to employ this method, which was suggested to it from Petrograd. It assumed the role of arbiter between the two groupings and succeeded not right away, to be sure, in assuring not only their collaboration but their complete fusion in the organization. There you have an important example which deserves to be kept in mind and might serve to light up some bureaucratic skulls. We have said that every important and lasting grouping in the party, to say nothing of every organized faction, has a tendency to become spokesperson of some social interests. Every incorrect deviation may, in the course of its development, become the expression of the interests of a class hostile or half hostile to the proletariat. But first of all, this applies to bureaucratism. It is necessary to begin right there. That bureaucratism is an incorrect deviation and unhealthy deviation. Will not, let's hope, be contested. This being the case, it threatens to lead the party off the right road, the class road. That is precisely where its danger lies. But here is a fact that is instructive to the highest degree and at the same time most alarming. Those comrades who assert most flatly, with the greatest insistence and sometimes most brutally, that every difference of opinion, every grouping of opinion, however temporary, is an expression of the interests of classes opposed to the proletariat, do not want to apply this criterion to bureaucratism. Let's see. No, that's not necessary. Yet the social criterion is, in the given instance, perfectly in place, for your bureaucratism is a well-defined evil, a notorious and incontestably injurious deviation, officially condemned, but not all in the process of disappearing. Moreover, it is pretty difficult to make it disappear at one blow. But if, as the resolution of the Central Committee says, bureaucratism threatens to detach the party from the masses, and consequently to weaken the class character of the party, it follows that the struggle against bureaucratism can in no case be identified in advance with some kind of non-proletarian influence. On the contrary, the aspiration of the party to preserve its proletarian character must inevitably generate resistance to bureaucratism. Naturally, under cover of this resistance, various erroneous, unhealthy, and harmful tendencies may manifest themselves. They cannot be laid bare save by the Marxian analysis of their ideological content. But to identify resistance to bureaucratism with a grouping which allegedly serves as a channel for alien influences is to be oneself the channel for bureaucratic influences. Nevertheless, there should be no oversimplification and vulgarization in the understanding of the thought that the priority differences and all this holds up for more groupings are nothing but a struggle for influence of the antagonistic classes. Thus, in 1920, the question of the invasion of Poland stirred up two currents of opinion, one advocating a more audacious policy, the other preaching prudence. Were there different class tendencies there? I do not believe that anyone would risk such an assertion. There are only divergences in the appreciation of the situation, of the forces, of the means. But the essential criterion of the appreciation was the same in both parties. It frequently happens that the party is able to resolve one and the same problem by different means, and differences arises as to which of the means is the better, the more expeditious, the more economical. These differences may, depending on the question, embrace considerable sections of the party, but that does not necessarily mean that there are two class tendencies. There is no doubt that we shall have not one but dozens of disagreements in the future, for our path is difficult, and the political tasks as well as the economic questions of socialist organization will unfailingly engender differences of opinion and temporary groupings of opinion. The political verification of all the nuances of opinion by Marxian analysis will always be one of the most efficacious preventative measures of our party. Uh, let's see. Let's take this. But it's this concrete Marxian verification that must be resorted to, and not the stereotyped phrases which are a defense mechanism of bureaucratism. The heterogeneous political ideology which is now rising up against bureaucratism can be all the better checked and purged of all alien and injurious elements the more seriously the road of the new course is entered upon. I'll take this. However, this is impossible without a serious change in the mentality and the intentions of party apparatus. But we are witness, on the contrary, to a new offensive at the present time by the latter, which rejects every criticism of the old course, formally condemned but not yet liquidated, by treating it as a manifestation of factional spirit. If factionalism is dangerous, and it is criminal to shut your eyes to danger represented by conservative bureaucratic factionalism, it is against precisely this danger that the resolution of the Central Committee is primarily directed. The maintenance of the unity of the party is the gravest concern to the great majority of communists, but must be said openly. If there is today a serious danger to the unity, or the very least the unanimity of the party, is unbridled bureaucratism. This is the camp in which provocative voices have been raised. That's where they have dared to say, we are not afraid of a split. It's the representatives of this tendency who thumb through the past, seeking out everything likely to inject more rancor into discussion, resuscitating artificially the recollections of the old struggle and the old split, in order to accustom imperceptibly the mind of the party to the possibility of a crime as monstrous and as disastrous as the new split. They seek to set each other against the need of the party unity and party's need of a less bureaucratic regime. The party is allowed to take itself to take this road and sacrifice the vile elements of its own democracy, would only succeed in exacerbating its internal struggle and upsetting its cohesion. You cannot demand of the party confidence in this apparatus when you yourself have no confidence in the party. There is the whole question. Preconceived bureaucratic distrust of the party, of its consciousness, and its spirit of discipline is the principal cause of all the evils generated by the domination of the apparatus. The party does not want factions, and it will not tolerate them. It is monstrous to believe that it will shatter or permit anyone to shatter its apparatus. It knows that this apparatus is composed of the most valuable elements, who incarnate the greatest part of the experiences of the past. But once to renew it and to remind it that it is its apparatus, that it is elected by it, must not detach itself from it. On reflecting well on the situation created in the party, which has shown itself in a particularly clear light in the grouping of course of the discussion, may be seen that the future presents itself under a double perspective. Either the organic ideological regrouping that is now taking place in the party along the line of the resolutions of the Central Committee will be a step forward on the road to organic growth of the party, the beginning of a new great chapter, which would be the most desirable outcome for us all, the one most beneficial to the party, which would then easily overcome any excess of the discussion and any opposition, say nothing of vulgar democratic tendencies. Or else, the apparatus, passing over to the offensive, will come more and more under the power of its most conservative elements, and, on the pretext of combating factions, will throw the party backwards and restore, quote, calm. This second eventuality would be by far the most grievous one. It would not prevent the development of the party. It goes without saying, but this development would take place only at the cost of considerable efforts and upheavals. For this method would only foster still more of the tendencies that are injurious, disintegrative, and hostile to the party. These are the two eventualities to envisage. My letter on the new course has as its purpose to aid the party to take the first road, which is the most economical and most correct. And I stand fully by the position at rejecting any tendacious or deceitful interpretation. All right, and next one will be on bureaucratism and the revolution, chapter 4. So I went back and did some summaries. So it frequently happens that the party is able to resolve one and the same problem by different means. Differences arise as to which of these means is the better, more expeditious, the more economical. The differences may, depending on the question, raise considerable sections of the party, but does not necessarily mean that you have their two-class tendencies. So the method of dealing with problems may create divisions based on people's view on how best to deal with them, but these are not necessarily class-based divisions. There is no doubt that we shall have not one but dozens of disagreements for in the future, for our path is difficult and the political tasks as well as the economic questions of future socialist organization will unfailingly engender differences of opinion and temporary groupings of opinion. The political verification of all the nuances of opinion by Marxian analysis will always be one of the most efficacious preventative measures for our party. But it is this concrete Marxian verification that must be resorted to, and not the stereotype phrases which are the defense mechanism of bureaucratism. Our method of dealing with problems is a key part of Marxism, and that requires good preventative measures. These measures must be based in Marxian analysis, not through simply tossing them away. Every problem must be analyzed, not ignored through bureaucratic systems. Upon reflecting well on the situation created in the party, which has shown itself in a particularly clear light in the course of the discussion, it may be seen that the future presents itself under a double perspective. Either the organic ideological regroupings as now taking place in the party along the line of the resolutions, the Central Committee will be a step forward on the road of the organic growth of the party, the beginning of a great new chapter, which would be the most desirable outcome for us all, the one most beneficial to the party, which would then easily overcome any excesses in discussion and in the opposition, to say nothing of vulgar democratic tendencies. Or else the apparatus, passing over to the offensive, will come more and more under the power of its most conservative elements, and on the pretext of combating factions will throw the party backwards and restore quote-unquote calm. The second eventuality would be by far the most grievous one. It would not prevent the development of the party, it goes without saying, but this development would only take place at the cost of considerable efforts and upheavals. For this method would only foster still more tendencies that are injurious, disintegrative, and hostile to the party. These are the two eventualities to envisage. So we should avoid excess of discussion or in opposition or in vulgar democratic tendencies. These are best avoided by organic growth. Conservative elements must be combated as this leads to bureaucracy in order to maintain itself. So we are on chapter 4, Bureaucratism and the Revolution. Outline of a report that the author could not deliver. 1. The essential conditions which not only prevent the realization of the socialist ideal, but are, in addition, sometimes a source of painful tests and grave dangers to a revolution, are well enough known. They are A. The internal social contradictions of the revolution, which are automatically compressed under war communism, but which, under the new economic policy, unfold unfailingly and seek to find political expression. B. The protracted counter revolutionary threat to the Soviet Republic represented by the imperial states. The social contradictions of the revolution are class contradictions. What are the fundamental classes of our country? A. The proletariat. B. The peasantry. C. The new bourgeoisie with the layer of bourgeois intellectuals that covers it. From the standpoint of economic role and political significance, first place belongs to the proletariat organized in the state and to the peasantry which provides the agricultural products that are dominant in our economy. The new bourgeoisie plays principally the role of intermediary between Soviet industry and agriculture, as well as between the different parts of Soviet industry and in the different spheres of rural economy, but it does not confine itself to being a commercial intermediary. In part, it also assumes the role of organizer of production. 3. Putting aside, for the moment, the question of the tempo of the development of the proletarian revolution in the West, the course of our revolution will be determined by the comparative growth of the three fundamental elements of our economy: state industry, agriculture, and private commercial industrial capital. 4. Historical analogies with the Great French Revolution, the fall of the Jacobins, made by liberalism and Menshevism for their own nourishment and consolation, are superficial and inconsistent. The fall of the Jacobins was predetermined by the lack of maturity of the social relationships. The left, ruined artisans and merchants, deprived of the possibility of economic development, could not be a firm support for the revolution. The right, bourgeoisie, grew irresistibly. Finally, Europe, economically and politically more backwards, prevented the revolution from spreading beyond the limits of France. In all these respects, our situation is incomparably more favorable. With us, the nucleus as well as the left wing of the revolution is the proletariat, whose tasks and objectives coincide entirely with the tasks of the socialist construction. The proletariat is politically so strong that while permitting, within certain limits, the formation by its side of a new bourgeoisie, it has the peasantry participate in the state power not through the intermediary of the bourgeoisie and the pay bourgeois parties, but directly, thus barring to the bourgeoisie any access to political life. The economic and political situation of Europe not only does not exclude, but makes inevitable the extension of the revolution over its territory. So that if, in France, even the most clairvoyant policy of the Jacobins would have been powerless to alter radically the course of events, with us, whose situation is infinitely more favorable, the correctness of a political line drawn according to methods of Marxism will be, for a considerable period of time, a decisive factor in safeguarding the revolution. Part 5. Let's take the historical hypothesis more unfavorable to us. The rapid development of private capital, if it should take place, would signify that Soviet industry and commerce, including the cooperatives, do not assure the satisfaction of the needs of peasant economy. In addition, it would show that the private capital is interposing itself more and more between the worker state and the peasantry. It's acquiring an economic and therefore a political influence over the latter. It goes without saying that such a rupture between Soviet industry and agriculture, between the proletariat and the peasantry, would constitute a grave danger for the proletarian revolution, a symptom of the possibility of the triumph of the counter-revolution. Part 6. What are the political paths by which the victory of the counter-revolution might come if the economic hypothesis just set forth were to be realized? There could be many. Either the direct overthrow of the Workers' Party, or its progressive degeneration, or finally the conjunction of a partial degeneration, splits, and counter-revolutionary upheavals. The real development or one of one or the other of these eventualities would depend above all on the tempo of the economic development. In case private capital succeeded little by little, slowly, in dominating state capital, the political process would assume in the main the character of degeneration of the state apparatus in a bourgeois direction, with the consequences that this would involve for the party, Private capital increased rapidly and succeeded in fusing with the peasantry. The active counter-revolutionary tendencies directed against the Communist Party would then probably prevail. If we set forth these hypotheses bluntly, it is of course not because we consider them historically probable. On the contrary, their probability is at a minimum, but only because such a way of putting the question makes possible a more correct and all-sided historical orientation, and consequently, the adoption of all possible preventative measures. The superiority of us Marxists is in distinguishing and grasping the new tendencies and new dangers, even when they are only in an embryonic stage. I'm actually going to add that. That's a good quote. Okay, the party must hypothesize about any and all circumstances which may arise, detecting them even in their infancy. The recognition of a worst case scenario, it becomes possible to make all necessary preventative measures. Continuing. 7. The conclusion from what we have already said in the economic domain brings us to the problem of the quote-unquote scissors. That is, to the rational organization of industry and to its coordination with the peasant market. To lose time in this connection is to slow down our struggle against private capital. That is where the principal task is, the essential key to the problem of the revolution and of socialism. Let's see. Rational organization, coordination. Okay, never mind. 8. If the counter-revolutionary danger rises up, as we have said, out of certain social relationships, this in no way means a rational policy. It is not possible to parry this danger, even under unfavorable economic conditions for the revolution, to reduce it, to remove it, to postpone it. Such a postponement is in turn apt to save the revolution by assuring it either a favorable economic shift at home or contact with the victorious revolution in Europe. That is why, on the basis of the economic policy indicated above, we must have a definite state and party policy, including a definite policy inside the party, aimed at counteracting the accumulation and consolidation of the tendencies directed against the dictatorship of the working class and nurtured by the difficulties and failures of the economic development. 9. The heterogeneity of the social composition of our party reflects the objective contradictions of the development of the revolution, along with the tendencies and dangers flowing from it. The factory nuclei, which assure the contact of the party with the essential class of the revolution, now represent 1/6 member of the party. In spite of all their negative sides, the cells of the Soviet institution assure the party its leadership of the state apparatus, which also determines the great specific way of these cells. A large percentage of old militants take part in the life of the party through the medium of these Soviet cells. The rural cells give the party a certain contact, still very weak, with the countryside. The military cells affect the contact of the party with the army, by means of the latter with the countryside too, above all. Finally, in the cells of the educational institutions, all these tendencies and influence mingle and cross. This is actually as well, because we will have these within before we have our revolutionary. So the party has nuclei cells within various social groups, all which influence the party. Must have some way of dealing with them. So we've got factory nuclei, which is principally proletarian social groups, rural cells, which link with the countryside, military cells, which link with the army and countryside, and the education institution cells, which link all social groups. Continuing. 10. By their class composition, the factory cells are, it goes without saying, fundamental. Inasmuch as they constitute only 1/6 of the party, and their most active elements are taken away to be assigned to the party or state apparatus, the party cannot yet, unfortunately, lean exclusively or even principally upon them. Their growth will be the surest gauge of the success of the party in industry and economy in general, and at the same time the best guarantee that it will retain its proletarian character. But it's hardly possible to expect their speedy growth in the immediate future. As a result, the party will be obliged in the next period to assure its internal equilibrium and its revolutionary line by leaning on the cells of an heterogeneous social composition. 11. The counter-revolutionary tendencies can find a support among the kulaks, the millmen, the retailers, the concessionaries. In a word, among elements much more capable of surrounding the state apparatus in any party than the party itself. Only the peasant and the military cells might be threatened by more direct influence, even penetration by kulaks. Nevertheless, the differentiation of the peasantry represents a factor that will be a help to us. The exclusion of the kulaks from the army, including the territorial divisions, should not only remain an untouchable rule, but what is more, become an important measure for the political education of the rural youth, the military units, and particularly the military cells. The workers will assure their leading role in the military cells by counterposing politically the rural working masses of the army to the renaissant stratum of the kulaks. In the rural cells, too, this counterposition applies. Success of the work will naturally depend in the long run on the extent to which the state industry succeeds in satisfying the needs of the countryside. So essentially, what they're saying is, yeah, the kulaks are going to be a thing. Um, uh, the kulaks will be a thing, but in order to deal with them, rather than necessarily going out with the state and truncheons, no, instead, you've got your um, you've got your military cells, and you've got the soldiers who are, of course, going home or working in the rural areas and stuff like that. And they are ideologically trained in order to basically be like, hey, don't listen to these guides. They're a bunch of counter-revolutionaries. And same with the education cells and with the rural ones, right? Continuing. But whatever the speed of our economic successes may be, our fundamental political line in the military cells must not be directed not simply against an NEP men, that would be the new economic policy men, really wanted to stick around for a long time, but primarily against a renascent kulak stratum, the only historically conceivable and serious support for any and all counter-revolutionary attempts. In this respect, we need more minute analysis of the various components of the army from the standpoint of their social composition. 12. It is beyond doubt that through the medium of the rural and military cells, tendencies reflecting more or less in the countryside, with the special trait that distinguishes it from the town, filter and will continue to filter it into the party. If that were not the case, the rural cells would have no value for the party. The changes in mood that manifest themselves in the cells are a reminder or a warning to the party. The possibility of directing these cells according to a party line depends on the correctness of the general direction of the party, as well as upon its internal regime and, in last analysis, on whether we come closer to solving or attenuating the problem of the scissors. 13. The state apparatus is the most important source of bureaucratism. On the one hand, it absorbs an enormous quantity of the most active party elements and teaches the most capable of them the methods of administration of men and things instead of political leadership of the masses. On the other hand, it preoccupies largely the attention of the party apparatus for which it exerts by its methods of administration. Hence, in large measure, the bureaucratization of the apparatus which threatens to separate the party from the masses. This is precisely the danger that is now most obvious and direct. The struggle against other dangers must, under present conditions, begin with a struggle against bureaucratism. I'm going to add this to our dictatorship of the proletariat thread. 14. It is unworthy of a Marxist to consider that bureaucratism is only the aggregate of the bad habits of office holders. Bureaucratism is a social phenomena in that it is a definite system of administration of men and things. Its profound causes lie in the heterogeneity of society, the difference between the daily and the fundamental interests of various groups of the population. Bureaucratism is complicated by the fact that the lack of culture of the broad masses. With us, the essential source of bureaucratism resides in the necessity of creating and sustaining a state apparatus that unites the interests of the proletariat those of the peasantry in a perfect economic harmony, from which we are so far removed. The necessity of maintaining a permanent army is likewise another important source of bureaucratism. It is quite plain that precisely the negative social phenomena we have just enumerated, and which now nurture bureaucratism, could place the revolution in peril should they continue to develop. We have mentioned above this hypothesis. The growing discord between state and peasant economy, the growth of the kulaks in the country, their alliance of the private commercial industrial capital, these would be given the low cultural level, the toiling masses of this countryside, the part of the towns, the causes of the eventual counter-revolutionary dangers. In other words, bureaucratism in the state and party apparatus is the expression of the most vexatious tendencies inherent in our situation, of the defects and deviations in our work which, under certain social conditions, might sap the basis of the revolution. And in this case, as in many others, quantity will at a certain stage be transformed into quality. I'm going to add this as well to that. But this is more. This part I want to add to our notes here, but at the same time, this is a polemic um, for the tackling of bureaucracy within the party. Remember that this is pre-revolution that we're working on, and this text is talking about post-revolution. Now, of course, the formation of the party post-revolution in most ways is based on its formation pre-revolution. But at the same time, I think that it's important to avoid for the sense of talking about how a party is constructed, organized structurally, the strategy it takes on, and the tactics it follows. I think that I want to avoid really talking about what happens after. We've got our goal, yes, and our goal is key to talking about what we need to do, but I kind of want to focus in. It's not the right way to go about it, but the same way it's how I would prefer to. If somebody feels like it's a good idea, put it in. I'll add it, but I won't summarize it for now. For now. Going on. That's weird. I'll figure that out later. Anyway, continuing. 15. The struggle against the bureaucratism of the state apparatus is an exceptionally important but prolonged task, one that runs more or less parallel to our other fundamental tasks, economic reconstruction and the elevation of the cultural level of the masses. The other most important historical instrument for the accomplishment of these tasks is the party. Naturally, not even the party can tear itself away from the social and cultural conditions of the country, but as the voluntary organization, the vanguard of the best, the most active, and the most conscious element of the working class, is able to preserve itself much better than can the state apparatus from the tendencies of bureaucratism. For that, it must see the danger clearly and combat it without laying up. Thence the immense importance of the education of the party youth, based on personal initiative in order to serve the state apparatus in a new manner and transform it completely. I'm going to add that to the dictation of the proletariat as well. Okay. Next up is Chapter 5, Tradition and Revolutionary Policy. And we are going to skip Chapter 6 and 7, I think, because this is, yeah, I think that neither of these are going to be particularly important for our reading here. Chapter 5, Tradition and Revolutionary Policy, December 1923. The question of the relationship of tradition and party policy is far from simple, especially in our epoch. More than once recently, we have had occasion to speak of the immense importance of the theoretical and practical tradition of our party, and declared that we could in no case permit the breaking down of our ideological lineage. It is only necessary to come to agreement on what is meant by the tradition of the party. To do that, we must begin largely by the inverse method and take some historical examples in order to base our conclusions upon them. Let's take the classic party of the Second International, the German Social Democracy. Its half century of traditional policy was based upon an adaptation to parliamentarism and to the unbroken growth of the organization, the press, and the treasury. This tradition, which is profoundly alien to us, bore a semi-automatic character. Each day flowed, quote, naturally from the day before, and just as naturally prepared the day to follow. The organization grew, the press developed, the cash box swelled. Isn't this automation of the whole generation following Babel took shape? A generation of bureaucrats, of Philistines, of dullards whose political character was completely revealed in the first hours of the imperialist war. Because they sided with their own bourgeois state. Every Congress of the Social Democracy spoke invariably of the party's old tactic, consecrated by tradition. And the tradition was indeed powerful. It was an automatic tradition, uncritical, conservative, and it ended up by stifling the revolutionary will of the party. Okay, we're going to add this bit. This is a good quote. So tactics based on analysis of conditions but on traditions of the party rest in natural daily transition, stifle the party and lead to uncritical, conservative, and counter-revolutionary organizations separate from the masses. And alien. It's a word that we would use more generally. Continuing, the war finished for good the quote-unquote traditional equilibrium of the political life of Germany. From the very first days of its official existence, the young Communist Party entered a tempestuous period of crises and upheavals. Nevertheless, throughout its comparatively short history, it may be observed not only the creative but also the conservative role of tradition, which, at every stage, at every turn, collides with the objective needs of the moment and of the critical judgment of the party. As early as the first period of the existence of German communism, the direct struggle for power became its heroic tradition. The terrible events of March 1921 disclosed starkly that the party did not yet have sufficient forces for attaining its goal. It had to make a sharp about-face towards the struggle for the masses before recommencing the direct struggle for power. This about-face was hard to accomplish, for it went against the grain of the newly formed tradition. In the Russian party at the present time, we are being reminded of all the differences of opinion, even the most preposterous, that rose in the party or in its central committee in recent years. It would not hurt to recall also the principal disagreement that appeared at the time of the Third Congress of the Communist International. It is now obvious that the change achieved at the time of the leadership of Lenin, in spite of the furious resistance of a considerable part of Congress at the start, the majority literally saved the International from destruction and decomposition, which was threatened if it had gone the way of automatic, uncritical, quote-unquote, leftism, which, in a brief space of time, had already become a hardened tradition. After the Third Congress, the German Communist Party carried out painfully enough the necessary change. Then began the struggle for the masses under the slogan of the United Front, accompanied by long negotiations and other pedagogical procedures. This tactic lasted more than 2 years and yielded excellent results. But at the same time, these new propaganda methods, being protracted, were transformed to a new semi-automatic tradition, which played a very serious role in the events of the last half of 1923. It is now incontestable that the period running from May, beginning the resistance in the Ruhr, or July, collapse of the resistance, to November, when General Seat took over power, It was clearly marked period of crisis without precedent in the life of Germany. The resistance that the half-strangled Republican Germany of Hébert Cuno tried to offer against French militarism crumpled up, taking with it the pitiful social and political equilibrium of the country. The Ruhr catastrophe played, up to a certain point, the same role for quote-unquote democratic Germany. The defeat of the German troops played 5 years earlier for the Hohenzollern regime. Incredible depreciation of the mark, economic chaos, general effervescence and uncertainty, decomposition of the social democracy, a powerful flow of workers into the ranks of the communists, universal expectations of an overthrow. The Communist Party had abruptly changed the pace of its work and had profited by the 5 or 6 months that history afforded it for direct political, organizational, technical preparation for a seizure of power. The outcome of the event could have been quite different from the one we witnessed in November. There was a problem. The German party had entered a new brief period of this crisis, perhaps without precedent in world history, with the ready methods of the 2 preceding years of propagandistic struggle for the establishment of its influence over the masses. Here, a new orientation was needed, a new tone, a new way of approaching the masses, a new interpretation and application of the United Front, new methods of organization and of technical preparation, in a word, a brusque tactical change. The proletariat should have seen a revolutionary party at work, marching directly at the conquest of power. But the German party continued at its bottom its propaganda policy of yesterday, even if on a larger scale. It was only in October that it adopted a new orientation. But by then it had too little time left to develop its dash. Its preparation were speeded up feverishly. The masses were unable to follow it. The lack of assurance of the party communicated itself to both sides. And at a decisive moment, the party retreated without giving battle. The party surrendered its exceptional positions without resistance. The main reason is that it proved itself unable to free itself at the beginning of the new phase, May to July 1923, from the automatism of its preceding policy, established as it was meant for years to come, and to put forward squarely in its agitation, action, organization, and tactics the problem of taking power. Time is an important element of politics, particularly in a revolutionary epoch. Years and decades are sometimes needed to make up for lost months. It would have been the same for us if our party had not made its leap in April 1917 and then taken power in October. We have every reason to believe that the German proletariat will not pay too dearly for its omission, because the stability of the present German regime, above all, because of the international situation, is much more doubtful. Okay, we're going to this and um, and this. And remember, so this is Trotsky is riding on the side of the Third International in support of it. The previous stuff that we have been reading has been to the left of the Third International. So if there's any confusion about this, like in comparison to Gorder's open letter to Comrade Lenin, Trotsky is saying that the failure in this isn't the fact that, you know, the German Communist Party picked up the United Front as Gorder agitated against, but rather that they did not update how they picked it up. They just continued working as it was without recognizing the changing condition. So under such conditions, there must be an Under different conditions, different tactics are needed. When objective conditions are right, the workers need the party to represent a revolutionary party rather than one solely looking to increase numbers. Under such conditions, there must be an orientation which has a new tone, has new ways of approaching the masses, new formation of the United Front, new methods of organization, new technical preparation. This tactical change is ultimately a military formation aimed for direct action to seize power. The timing is centrally key, and if one misses a mark, it can utterly devastate. Therefore, relying was understood as traditionally effective in a given condition Under new conditions, cripples the party's ability to take advantage of many conditions. Continuing. It is clear that, as a conservative element, as the automatic pressure of yesterday upon today, tradition represents an extremely important force at the service of the conservative parties, and deeply inimical to the Revolutionary Party. The whole strength of the latter lies precisely in its freedom from conservative traditionalism. Does this mean that it's free with regard to tradition in general? Not at all. But the tradition of the Revolutionary Party is an entirely different nature. If we now take our Bolshevik Party and its revolutionary past, and in the period following October, it will be recognized that its most precious fundamental tactical quality is its unequal ability to reorient itself rapidly, to change tactics quickly, to renew its armament, and to apply new methods. In a word, to carry out abrupt turns. Tempestuous historical conditions have made this tactic necessary. Lenin's genius gave it a superior form. This is not to say, naturally, that our party is completely free of a certain conservative traditionalism. A mass party cannot be ideally free, but its strength and potency have manifested themselves in the fact that inertia, traditionalism, routinism were reduced to a minimum by far-sighted, profoundly revolutionary tactical initiative, at once audacious and realistic. It is in this that the genuine tradition party consists and should consist. The relatively strong bureaucratization of the party apparatus is inevitably accompanied by the development of conservative traditionalism with all of its effects. It's better to exaggerate this danger than underrate it. The undeniable fact that the most conservative elements of the apparatus are inclined to identify their opinions, their methods, and their mistakes with the quote-unquote old Bolshevism, and seek to identify the criticism of bureaucratism with the destruction of tradition. This fact, I say, is already by itself the most incontestable expression of a certain ideological petrifaction. Okay. Alright, so the party must be able to rapidly shift while also recognizing the need for tradition to act as a mass organization. Many people in it need to know what they are doing. If you're doing really fast and massive changes all the time, there's just going to be confusion. Nobody knows what the hell they're supposed to be doing or has the training to do so. You need to have a transitionary phase from moving from a United Front tactic, for example, to militarized party. It's not something that can really happen immediately, though to some degree it can. We must fight against inertia, traditionalism, and routinism, and these are fought by farsightedness and revolutionary tactical initiative. Back to the text. Marxism is a method of historical analysis, of political orientation, and not a mass of decisions prepared in advance. Leninism is the application of this method in the conditions of an exceptional historical epoch. It is precisely this union of the peculiarities of the epoch and the method that determines this courageous, self-assured policy in brusque turns in which Lenin gave us the finest models, in which he illuminated theoretically and generalized on more than one occasion. Marx said that advanced countries, to a certain extent, show the backward countries the image of their future. Out of this conditional proposition, an effort was made to set up the absolute law that was at the root of the quote-unquote philosophy of Russian Menshevism. By means of it, limits are fixed for the proletariat, flowing not from the course of the revolutionary struggle, but from a mechanical pattern. Menshevik Marxism was and remains solely the expression of the needs of bourgeois society, expression adapted to a belated quote-unquote democracy. In reality, it turned out that Russia, joining in its economy and its politics extremely contradictory phenomena, was the first to be pushed onto the road of the proletarian revolution. For a reminder, I'm sure everybody knows the Mensheviks took on a stance of stagism, said that we can't have a socialist revolution because a monarchy is still around. We need to have a bourgeois revolution and then develop the productive forces under capitalism and develop a lively um, bourgeois population and proletarianization, and so on and so forth. And then finally we can have the proletarian revolution. Lenin said, fuck that, that's stupid. We've already had a bourgeois development internally. We've got proletariat, we have bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie are doing their own attempts at revolution. The proletariat can do a revolution on top of theirs and essentially cross the finish line first and then dunk the bourgeoisie on their crossing right after from a better position. It did work out like that. But we're going to add this right here. So Marxism is a method, not a predetermination. Leninism is the application of the method under particular conditions. Some of Lenin is generalized, but most is reacting out of far-sighted analysis of specific conditions, seeking audacious tactical action. Continuing. Neither October, nor Brest-Litovsk, nor the creation of a regular peasant army, nor the system of requisitioning food products, nor the new economic policy, nor the State Plan Commission were or could have been foreseen or predetermined by pre-October Marxism or Bolshevism. All these facts in turn were a result of the independent, critical application of the methods of Bolshevism, marked by the spirit of initiative in situations that differed in each case. I don't know if that's really necessarily the case. Like I can absolutely say that, for example, a key thing that the proletarian state will need to do after the revolution is do such and such in order to deal with the environmental crisis. The methods that that's carried out might differ to some degree, but that's more for unrelated reasons than to tactics and stuff like that. But I understand what he's going at. So there are obviously things that need to be done, and there's additional things that might need to be done in order to do those things. But there are things that no matter what, we know that we need to be prepared to be able to do. And we can say that our organization needs to be in place in order to do those things and thereby have a particular tactical plan or strategy, rather, to deal with those things. The tactics might be open-ended, but the strategy isn't. The goal isn't. And thereby the tactics are going to be, influenced by those things. But let's see. Every one of these decisions before being adopted provoked struggles. Simple appeal to tradition never decided anything. As a matter of fact, with each new task and each new turn, it is not a question of searching in tradition and discovering their non-existent reply, but profiting from all the experience of the party to find oneself a new solution suitable to the situation and, by doing so, enriching tradition. It may even be put more sharply. Leninism consists of being courageously free of conservative retrospection, being bound by precedent, purely formal references, and quotation. Lenin himself not so long ago expressed his thought in Napoleon's words, quote, I'm not reading French, start fighting and then see. To put it differently, once engaged in the struggle, don't be excessively preoccupied with canon and precedent, but plunge into reality as it is and seek there the forces necessary for victory, the roads leading to it. By following this line that Lenin, not once but dozens of times, was accused in his own party of violating tradition and repudiating old Bolshevism. We'll add this. Do it like this. So every tactic should provoke struggle and analysis drawing from previous experience to determine usefulness of the situation. Leninism seeks to be free of conservative retrospection, precedent, puerilism, and quotations. And Lenin in turn quotes Napoleon, start fighting and then see. He aims to be active and determine what is needed as the aggressor rather than the defender. Continuing. Let's recall that they invariably appeared under the cover of defending Bolshevik traditions against Leninist deviation. There's an extremely interesting material on this score in Krasnaya Letopis, Red Chronicle number 9. No footnote. Under the aegis of old Bolshevism, in reality under the aegis of formal, fictitious, false tradition, all that was routinous in the party rose up against Lenin's April theses. One of our party's historians, the historians of our party up to now, have unfortunately not had much luck, told me at the height of the October events, quote, I'm not with Lenin because I am an old Bolshevik. I continue to stand on the ground of the democratic dictatorship of the proletariat and the peasantry. The struggle of the, quote, left communists against the Brest-Litovsk priests and for revolutionary war likewise took place in the name of saving the revolutionary traditions of the party, in the name of the purity of the old Bolshevism, which had to be protected against the dangers of state opportunism. It is needless to recall that the whole criticism by the workers' opposition consisted at bottom of accusing the party of violating the old traditions. Only recently, we saw the most official interpreters of the party's traditions on the national question. They could stand in distinct contradiction with the needs of party policy in this question as well as to Lenin's position. See, no, I don't agree with this. He can't just sweep this under the rug as, oh, traditionalism. I could just as easily say, no, we're talking about fucking party principles. The party has a principle of the dictatorship of the proletariat. You can't just go in and redefine it. I'm not saying that the dictatorship of the proletariat was redefined. But what I am saying is that such an argument, I think, is weak coming from this position. This isn't these splits. So in previous texts, he was clear to say that it wasn't a split, are not stemming from rejection of traditionalism or saying that we need to go back to previous tactics. No, it's saying your strategy is wrong. What you're aiming for is not what was promised. And he's sweeping under the rug and saying, oh, well, Lenin disagreed with formalism and, and wanted to, and didn't like precedent and stuff like that. But if, the party said we're going to do such and such and created precedent for it, and then the party didn't do such and such, then of course people are going to be like, what the fuck, man? I don't think that you can just say, oh no, that they're just being conservative. No, they're not. No, they're not. Demanding that the party do what it said it was going to do is not conservativeness, nor is it traditionalist or routinist. Now, I'm not saying that I knew everything that was going on there. I'm sure Trotsky is more aware, but he does have a habit of this, in my experience, reading him. So, I just want to put that out there in terms of critique. Continuing. These examples could be multiplied, and any number of them others could be cited, historically less important but no less conclusive. But what we have just said suffices to show that every time objective conditions demand a new turn, a bold about-face, and creative initiative, conservative resistance betrays a natural tendency to counterpose the, quote, old tradition, what is called old Bolshevism, but is in reality the empty husk of a period that just left behind in new tasks, new conditions, new orientation. The more ingrown the party apparatus, the more imbued it is with feelings of its own intrinsic importance. The slower reacts and needs emanating from the ranks, and the more inclined it is to set formal tradition against new tasks and needs. If there is one thing likely to strike a mortal blow to the spiritual life of the party and the doctrinal training of the youth, is certainly the transformation of Leninism from method demanding for its application initiative, critical thinking, and ideological courage to a canon which reads nothing more than than interpreters appointed for good and all. Leninism cannot be conceived of without theoretical breadth, without critical analysis of the material bases of the political process. The weapon of Marxist investigation must be constantly sharpened and applied, precisely in that traditional consists not in the substitution of a formal reference or an accident of quotation. Least of all can Leninism be reconciled with ideological superficiality and theoretical slovenliness. Okay. So the party must grow outwards, not inwards. The tactics of Leninism must be developed through application initiative, critical thinking, ideological courage. Laying it solely to past formal reference will stop its development. Affected. Lenin cannot be chopped up into quotation sued for every possible case, because for Lenin the formula never stands higher than the reality. It is always a tool that makes it possible to grasp reality and to dominate it. It would not be hard to find in Lenin dozens and dozens of passages which, formally speaking, seem to be contradictory. But what must be seen is not the formal relationship of one passage to another, but the real relationship of each of them to the concrete reality in which the formula was introduced as a lever. Lenin's truth is always concrete. So, I just want to say, Marx is never incoherent. I've read a lot of Marx. There's never a time where it's like, this thing that he said here is in contradiction with what he said there. And I don't think, again, I don't think that you can just get away with suddenly going in and jumping over to something else here. I don't think that you can just get away with saying, oh, well, different conditions meant that I could say something that was contradictory to what I said before. Now, I could go in and say, hey, this new condition means that we need to pursue this new thing and this old thing no longer applies as well. That's entirely the case. But if you're contradicting yourself, you got another problem entirely. Anyway, continuing. As a system of revolutionary action, Leninism presupposes a revolutionary sense sharpened by reflection and experience, which, in the social realm, is equivalent to muscular sensation and physical labor. A revolutionary sense cannot be confused with demagogical flair. The latter may yield ephemeral successes, sometimes even sensational ones, but is a political instinct of an inferior type. It always leans towards the line of least resistance. Leninism, on the other hand, seeks to pose and resolve the fundamental revolutionary problems. To overcome the principal obstacles, its demagogical counterparts insist in evading the problems, creating illusory appeasement and lulling critical thought to sleep. Leninism is, first of all, realism, the highest qualitative and quantitative appreciation of reality, from the standpoint of revolutionary action. Precisely because of this is irreconcilable with flying from reality behind the screen of hollow agitationalism, with passive loss of time, with haughty justification of yesterday's mistakes on the pretext of saving the tradition of the party. Leninism is genuine freedom from formalistic prejudices, from moralizing doctrinarism, from all forms of intellectual conservatism attempting to stifle the will to revolutionary action. But to believe that Leninism signifies that, quote, anything goes, would be an irredeemable mistake. Leninism includes the mortality, not formal, but genuinely revolutionary, of mass action and the mass party. Nothing is so alien to it as functionary arrogance and bureaucratic cynicism. A mass party has its own morality, which is the bond of fighters in and for action. Demagogy is irreconcilable with the spirit of revolutionary party because it is deceitful. By presenting one or another simplified solution for the difficulties of the hour, it inevitably undermines the future and weakens the party's self-confidence. Swept by the wind and gripped by a serious danger, demagogy easily dissolves into panic. It is hard to juxtapose, even on paper, panic and Leninism. We're not going to summarize this, but it's a good reflection. I really need to figure out what it is I've done wrong that there's been a break in the that much better. Okay. Leninism is warlike from head to foot. War is impossible without cunning, without subterfuge, without deception of the enemy. Victorious war cunning is a constituent element of Leninist politics. But at the same time, Leninism is a supreme revolutionary honesty towards the party and the working class. It admits no fiction, no bubble blowing, no pseudo grandeur. Leninism is orthodox, obdurate, irreducible, but does not contain so much as a hint of formalism, canon, or bureaucratism. In this struggle, it takes the bull by the horns. To make out of the traditions of Leninism a super theoretical guarantee of the infallibility of all the words and thoughts of the interpreters of these traditions is to scoff at a genuine revolutionary tradition and transform it into official bureaucratism. It is ridiculous and pathetic to try to hypnotize a great revolutionary party by repetition of the same formulas, according to which the right line should be sought not in the essence of each question, not in the method of posing and solving this question, but as an information of a biographical character. Let's get this. Going to dot. Okay. Since I am obliged to speak of myself for a moment, I will say that I do not consider the road by which I came to Leninism as less safe and reliable than the others. I came to Lenin fighting, but I came fully and all the way. My actions in the service of the party are the only guarantee of this. I can give no other supplementary guarantees, and if the question is to be posed in the field of biographical investigation, then at least it ought to be done properly. It would then be necessary to reply to thorny questions. Were all those who were faithful to the master in the small matters also faithful to him in the great? Did all those who showed such docility in the presence of the master thereby offer guarantees that they would continue his work in his absence? Does the whole Leninism lie in docility? I have no intention whatever in analyzing these questions by taking as advantage examples individual comrades with whom, as far as I am concerned, intend to continue working hand in hand. Whatever the difficulties and differences of opinion may be in the future, they can be victoriously overcome only by the party's collective thinking, checked upon itself each time and thereby maintaining the continuity of development. This character of revolutionary tradition is bound up with the peculiar character of revolutionary discipline, where tradition is conservative, discipline is passive, and is violated at the first moment of crisis. Whereas in our party, tradition consists in the highest revolutionary activity, discipline attains its maximum point where its decisive importance is constantly checked in action. That is a source of the indestructible alliance, revolutionary initiative, of critical, bold elaboration of questions, with iron discipline in action, and it's only by the superior activity that the youth can receive from the old tradition to discipline and carry it on. We cherish the traditions of Bolshevism as much as anyone. Let no one dare identify bureaucratism with Bolshevism, tradition with officious routine. And that is the total of the text that we are going to read for this. There's also the underestimation of the peasantry with the fundamental questions of the food and agrarian policy, and the planned economy with the new course, functionarism in the army and elsewhere, on a smishya American between town and country, and that must be on the division between town and two generations. Well, I'm sure that these are perfectly interesting. Have nothing to do with our investigation into work organization, though they might be useful for our research into the dictatorship of the proletariat. With that said, we are going to end this reading. Thank you for coming, everyone.